Adah, take it away.
Thank you, Ali. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world. It's a real pleasure to be back with you again. Where do I start? It's a real pleasure to be doing, I'm going to say what I said last time. It's a real pleasure to be doing this event. However, there is also a level of frustration that it's taken till now to get to this point. But I welcome you all. I know that I've had a pre-conversation with the speakers, with the panelists, and what we've asked is that this is going to be a conversation. It's going to be very open, very direct, very honest. And so for some, it may be emotional. For some, it may be, upsetting. There may be all sorts of emotions that come through. But we feel that this is a way of actually opening up the conversations and really starting to implement change. And as Ali said, this particular topic for this session came out of the previous session, which was Global Action Against Racism. And I had asked the panelists, we had a great conversation, I asked the panelists, what would be the hypothesis for change? And Pride, one of the speakers, said that, we need to have more empathy for white women, that we need to understand that we need to help white women understand that they have more power than they recognize, and that we can't do this on our own, that actually it needs to be a two-sided thing of women coming together. And so today it is my great honor to introduce our speakers. If you were with us at the last session, you will also understand the way that I get people to introduce themselves. So as women of color, as people of color, there are two ways that we are instantly othered. The first is visually, and the second is by our names. Because our names tend to have heritage, they bring our ancestry, and when we come into a space, we're bringing our ancestors and our heritage and the stories of who we are with us. And that is why when people try and shorten our name or say, do you have an English version, or, try and change the pronunciation even, that's why it stings so much, because you're asking us to take out part of our heritage and part of our ancestry. So rather than me do an introduction to the speakers, I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and introduce them by their name, if they'd like to, where it came from, but their ethnic heritage. But also importantly for this conversation, how do they ethnically identify right now? So I'm going to start with Nicole.
Mute button. Thank you so much. Always a struggle. Right, so my name's Nicole Kavander, and my name is Nicole, is a French name originally, and was given to me because I think mainly my mum loved the name, but also my parents wanted all of us kids to have international names, so names that sort of everyone could pronounce, and Kavander is a German surname. And I am, so my father was from Uganda and my mum is Finnish, and I was born and raised in Sweden. So it's a really difficult question because I kind of identify with all of them. So I obviously I say that I'm Swedish, that I'm mixed Swedish, but I also identify as Ugandan and as Finnish. But I think there is a subcategory for us that are mixed. So I also identify with that.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. There's some points that we will pick up on later. Kai, thank you.
Hey guys, my name is Kai Devereaux Lawson. I work at WPP and I got a really cool podcast. And in that, what's most important is me, right? So I would say I live in New York, in Brooklyn, New York, and my name, Kai comes from the restaurant that I was told that my parents liked to go to when they were dating. I don't ask too many more questions about that because honestly, I don't want to know. However, my middle name, Devereaux, I was, for those of you that are familiar with soap operas, my mother named me after Dominique Devereaux from the famed Dynasty soap opera. And I tried to live up to that name as best I can. That woman was amazing and had the best reads on the entire series. And then Lawson comes from my family in Panama, which will, I guess, answer the next question, is I identify as Afro-Latina. So I am 100% Black, but my ethnicity and my family history stems from the Central America by way of the Caribbean. And I'm sure as we'll get into talking about that, yes, there was slavery in Latin countries. And as you can imagine, Lawson stems back from that. So that's a brief history of how you got all of this with you today.
Thank you. Ciara.
Hi everyone, thanks Adah. It's so amazing to see all these faces here. I'm just so excited. My name is Ciara. I come from the UK, specifically London, specifically South London. For those of you who know what I'm talking about. And I think Adah knows what I'm talking about. Yep. And my mother's white British from Yorkshire, so I'm also proud of that. And my father's from Ghana in West Africa. And I grew up in the UK. I'm now based in Germany. And in terms of where my name comes from, Ciara is actually an Irish name. It comes from the old Irish word for black. And Davis is a Welsh name from my Welsh grandfather. And how would I define myself? It's a really good question. I often find when we're asked to identify ourselves, it's more often about helping other people decide what box we belong in and understand why we're brown. So I don't always feel the need to, but I guess what I know about myself is that I'm brown, I'm Black, and I feel that sense of identity with other people from the African diaspora. And I'm British. Being in Germany reminds me daily how British I am. And also, as Nicole said, I feel there is also that element of being mixed and knowing what it's like to never quite fit in visually with the dominant society that you're living in, which has advantages as well as disadvantages.
Thank you. And actually that leads really nicely into my first real question for you all. In your introductions, you've all introduced yourself in terms of heritage and where you come from. And something that's very, we as women of colour are very aware of is that there are very different ways to be Black, very different understanding of what that means, or to be othered. And I thought that we would start by deconstructing what some of that is, because to your point, when we go to fill in forms, they have Black British, Black African, Black Caribbean, but what does that actually mean? And I thought that we would start by really picking that apart and understanding, what does being Black or what does being othered mean to you, and where did you first learn that? Because for myself, I knew that I was Black before I knew myself. I was made aware of the fact that I was Black before I knew myself. And that goes deep. And so I wanted to ask you to share your own stories of that. So who would like to go first? Kai.
To shake off the nerves by going first. So I'll start with when did I realize I was Black? Sometimes the story is funny, sometimes it gets emotional. I think my hormones are in a good place right now, so I might not cry, but if
you feel to cry, cry. That's okay.
I was about 3 or 4 years old, and my parents were sending me to a daycare at the time. We lived in Westchester, Pennsylvania, so about 45 minutes outside of Philadelphia. It is a very conservative, relatively conservative now, but it was at the time very conservative, very white neighborhood, town, city, etc. And I had a friend at the daycare. Her name was Mary, and we would play every day. We would cut worms, we would jump in piles of leaves, we would just live our most amazing childhood lives. And then one day, and it's so unfortunate, I don't have a lot of memories of being young, but I remember this one day I walked into daycare and she would not speak to me. And I did not understand why, because in my mind, we were best friends. And finally, after trying to probe her throughout the day, like, why won't you play with me? Why won't you play with me? She turned and she said, my daddy said white people and Black people can't be friends. And that was the first time that I realized that I was different. And it hurt at the time. And I think for a long time, I had maybe a little bit of a negative taste of like, oh, I'm Black. Now no one wants to speak with me as a child, and especially as a child growing up in a very white city. where not many people look like me. They definitely don't speak like my parents who were fluent in Spanish, and just being different and weird, and my hair is different and my skin's different, and we don't eat the same things, until I started to realize that Blackness wasn't necessarily the thing that made me who I am. It was the thing that made my story bigger than me. And I would say what that means to me now, after having an experience of going to historically Black college in the US. I went to Howard University, of traveling as much as I could all over the world before the pandemic, and seeing Black people on just about every continent, and understanding that it's, for me, my Blackness is my history, right? It is my connection to the diaspora. It's my connection to a story that I'm not often told, about how great people that look like me are, and that people that look like me have done great things in the continent of Africa, in the continent of Europe, in the continent of Asia, in the continent of North America, throughout the Caribbean and Latin America, and that we all have shared a similar struggle of being othered. But despite that struggle of being othered, that you know, people are still able to accomplish so much. And so maybe for about the last 15 to 17 years, I've carried it as a badge. I'm extremely proud of my skin, of my hair, of my family, of my story, of people that share any of that likeness. And it took a long time to come away from that 3-year-old little girl who was told, I can't cut worms with you anymore, to now just being very confident and happy with my Blackness.
Wow, thank you. I know for me there's a lot that resonates with your story, but we're going to move to Ciara. Thank you. Ciara. Sorry, I keep getting it right. Ciara.
All good. Kai, well done for, you said you were not going to cry. I was welling up just hearing you tell your story. So thank you for sharing that with us. Yeah, it is really hard. Gosh, I'm getting so emotional. The question was, when was I first told, or when did I first realize I was Black?
What we're doing with this part of the conversation is really deconstructing what it means to be Black or to be othered. And so, you know, I ask if you can share some of that with us.
Yeah, absolutely. So I feel like I've always known. I don't feel there was ever a time when I didn't know. And just for context, so as I said, my mother's white, my father's Black, but I didn't grow up living in the same place. You know, I didn't grow up with a relationship with my father, unfortunately. So I was raised by a white woman and in her kind of white extended family. And I think, you know, she did her best to give me connection and context for understanding my identity, and that much as I was definitely her daughter, we weren't always going to be viewed as the same in society. So I think she must have told me. At some point, because I feel like I've always known. But I want to share that with you because sometimes I see women and men actually, when they're talking about how they can raise awareness of their own children about race, and they ask these questions of when is it too soon, when are they old enough? And I just want us to pause, because actually if you're raising a Black child, you don't have the luxury of waiting until they're old enough to understand. We have to be old enough whether we're old enough or not. We just have to figure it out because it's not optional. So think about that. If I, and I'm sure the other women here, were capable of coming to terms with it in whatever way we did as toddlers, that's something for us all to think about when we're raising children. It's never too early to start having conversations, because it's never too early to start engaging with the world. But back to the question you asked. So I feel like I've always known, and I remember my mother saying something else interesting when I was really young, and she told me that I was politically Black. And I remember thinking, what does that mean? And I think what she was trying to say is, like, you're part of a constituent group or a minority that might have different interests than I do, or that the majority has. So I remember being told, actually, that I was different from her in some way. But the first time of being really othered about it was when I'd moved somewhere new, and I think I must have been about 4 years old, and I was starting to make friends in this new area, and this girl told me, we're not playing with you, you're Black, you're disgusting, your skin's horrible, go back to where you come from. And I was about 4, and I was yeah, I remember I was shocked. Like, I must have run home and like been crying about it, because it was probably the first time that I felt like there's something about me that I can't do something about, that is this big barrier between me and others. And it was really scary for me. And I'd sort of forgotten about that for years, until later on, as you know, we all do interesting things in the world. And one of the things I do is I work a lot with trauma. And it wasn't until I was examining my own trauma that I realized that that was the first memory I have of not being good enough. And it was the time when I was othered and literally told that my skin was not good enough to be friends with the other girls.
Wow. Thank you. And, you know, I will say that, so I've been running a lot of anti-racism workshops and courses and everything. And one of the things that I say is that when you're asking people of colour to share their stories, you're also asking them to recreate the traumas. And so, you know, it's just it's almost a side note and a side for everybody who's here to recognise that by us, well, these ladies sharing their stories, and whenever you have conversations with people who've been othered, actually what you're doing is you're asking them to recreate the traumas. And so that is something to be aware of. And through previous conversations, we also recognise that there's traumas on all sides. But we're going to come back to that. Thank you. Nicole, would you like to share yours?
Yes, I should have gone first. It was really hard listening and kind of like going over my own memories at the same time. But my first memory was, I think it must have been maybe 4 or 5 as well. And I was actually in Finland visiting my family with my mum and my little brother. And the early 90s, at least in kind of Scandinavia and the Nordics, was a time where we had a bigger wave of neo-Nazis. So I remember us being in a shopping mall and this skinhead just started screaming and yelling at us and kind of pointing, and I think he was throwing stuff, and I remember being so scared, and mum started running with us, and like I just remember him being so angry with the fact that, you know, we were there, and probably shouting things like, you know, you don't belong here, leave, and shouting stuff at my mum. And I was asking her, like, why is he doing this? What's wrong? And she's like, don't listen to him. He's just crazy, you know. And I kind of, that's the first time I sort of associated my blackness with people being angry. Like, for some reason, I couldn't really distinguish why, but I just understood that some people are angry with me looking like this. That was sort of my concept growing up. And I remember I had a reoccurring nightmare as a child that this white man, would stab me and my brother for being black. And that was just a reoccurring, to the point where I had to go to a therapist because I refused to sleep. I was so afraid that was going to happen. And I think for a long time, it was kind of, I associated it with hate, you know, because it was always quite, people just seemed really angry with the fact that black people were here. And especially, I remember people being angry for the fact that my mum was white, and why had she chosen to be with a black man? And that was upsetting on both sides. And I think I always thought that the first time, I've been to Uganda once to see our family, and I was 15, and I kind of thought that this is it, you know, I'm going home and I'm going to be accepted. I'm finally going to know who I am. And I received even more hate, and I wasn't accepted there either, you know, because to them I was white. Why are you here? Why did your mum marry, you know, our man? You are not one of us. And so it's, you know, for years it was kind of like, okay, so I'm not black, I'm not white, I don't know what or who I am. And it wasn't until I moved to London when I was 21 and went to South London, and I just remember feeling so safe. Like, I remembered being so accepted. And I think a lot of people, because of my complexion, think that I'm Caribbean, or I do get a lot of, are you Latina? But there was no questions. It was just like, you're welcome here, like, you're one of us. And so I sort of, I think after living there for 7 years, I kind of came to terms with the fact that I'm me, and again to the fact that being mixed is also something, but just, you know, having the memories from all the different cultures, from Finnish to Swedish to Ugandan, and but yeah, for a long time it was always memories of hate, of people not wanting me to be alive, basically. Yeah. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. God, I'm, you know, the word sorry doesn't even take away. It can't take away those things. And as all of you've been talking, I'm, you know, welling up with emotion, because this is a daily facet of our lives. And I think that that's the part that when we spoke in the pre-call, that we wanted people to really understand that there is that what we're sharing here are daily facets of our lives. And in order to think about allyship in anything else, in any kind of support, that you need to understand where this comes from first. And actually to Nicole, to, you know, where you kind of ended is, and we spoke about this, all of us spoke about this in the pre-call, where does this idea of blackness originate? And we were talking about history and colonialism and, you know, because before you can start to move forward, you have to understand where we came from and how we got to this place. And so that's why we decided to start with the helping people to recognize that there are different nuances of blackness. And actually, Nicole, I'd love you to start with this question. Where does that idea of blackness and racism and colonialism, where does that originate?
So yeah, I mean, we have this famous scientist called Carl von Linné. He was a Swedish, I think, a botanist, and he was the first person to kind of start categorizing plants and kind of all different plants and everything. And off of his work, that was basically the foundation to start categorizing people into race. So I did look this up today. In 1922, there was an institute in Sweden that was founded, which basically they were researching race and categorizing people into race. And it was open until 1958, actually. So people were doing, you know, theses and really research on us, and also categorizing the races into aptitude for illnesses, crime, mental illness, all these things. So that's, as far as I know, where the foundation was actually laid into what the different hierarchies are, I guess, or, you know, how you categorize a race. And I just found that interesting when we spoke the other day as well, is that, you know, of course we have a Black Lives Matter movement here in Sweden, but it's interesting how especially media here is kind of trying to say that, you know, this is, you're bringing this problem in from America because we don't have this issue here. And it's interesting also when we talk about education, the fact that, you know, I never knew about this institute growing up. I found out as an adult. I listened to a documentary about it. That's how I found out. And also the fact that we're not taught that Sweden was part of the slave trading. We did purchase slaves, and, you know, we were one of the last countries in Europe to abolish slavery. But all we're taught is, oh, you know, look at all these other countries, look at America, look, oh, they're so bad. So again, we're still at a very much of a denial, or is it alternative history? I don't know. But it's very interesting how, you know, a lot of us are now bringing this back to the table, going, actually, it was one of our, you know, most established scientists who laid the foundation for this problem. It's actually thanks to him that we now categorize people the way we do.
And I think that, thank you, and I think that one of the things that I've been talking about is actually, if we go further back, so racism is 1922, something like that. Actually, if we go further back, colonialism,
exactly,
hundreds. Kai, I know you had some thoughts on this as well.
Right. So for those of you that are in this or on the have been to the East Coast of the U.S. In the last couple of years, or visited the African American Museum, Smithsonian Museum in D.C. I think that was actually the first time that I got a date or a time period of when the construct rather of race started in the 1600s. And if you've read the New York Times over the last year, I know Nicole Hannah-Jones published her series called 1619. So it was in the early 1600s during the I don't know what you would call it, during slavery, that my understanding comes from, where there were indentured servants. Many of them came from Ireland. There were actual enslaved people who were both from the continent of Africa, as well as who were Native Americans to the United States. And all of these people at the time, because of the harsh conditions, were kind of banding together to revolt, even in the early 1600s, against plantation owners or overseers, etc. And as a way to kind of break down those alliances, the construct of slavery, to my understanding, came into play as a way to minimize people coming together, basically creating a caste system. So it wasn't necessarily that enslaved people owners or slave owners were going to Africa, if you will, to find Black people. These were not Black people. These were people of their land, of their country, of their villages, of wherever they identified as, that come here. And because they had darker skin, they were placed, I guess, at the bottom of the I don't even know what to call it, at the bottom of the food chain, if you will. And while I don't know the specifics, I do know that it started in the 1600s, and not as a way simply just because they needed to categorize, but to embed a caste system to make people feel, quite frankly, Ciara, the same way you said earlier, your first memory of not being enough. And the most simple way to do that was based on how people looked. And I find it so interesting because while I know overseas and also in Latin America, growing up, I was taught, oh no, we don't have that problem where we're from. That's a US thing. But the reality is it's a caste system. And everywhere you go, there is a caste system that people fall into based on your gender, your geography, etc. It just happened to be the one that was chosen in the United States, and that also rippled through the world due to colonialism.
Yeah, thank you. Given what we're talking about, and we're now starting to use the language of racism and colonialism, I'm going to go to one of the questions. Do you think that language plays a part in keeping the white majority from understanding white supremacy and white privilege? I.e. words like race and terms like BAME, Black and minority ethnic. They say, I'm really struggling with the correct use of language that's not suppressive, oppressive, and sounds more progressive than you're not like us. Because I think that ties into what we're talking about, the idea of these were ideologies that, social constructs, and the language has been changed in so many ways that we have so many different ways of understanding. So would anybody like to pick up on that one?
I don't know if what I'm going to say is I don't have a nice way of saying it. I find it very hard to give that benefit of the doubt that language is that barrier when these constructs and these terminologies were in fact created by white professors and white thought leaders and white people. These are labels that were put upon us. And so while I understand it is a lot to learn, some of us have been learning this since we were 3 and 4 years old. And so it's just knowledge that we've acquired. And I think while we've learned it unintentionally, I think there needs to be an intention for anyone that actually wants to understand what it is all of this means, because you're either socialized into it on purpose, or you socialize yourself into it so that you can engage.
Ciara.
Well, on the language point, I would say context and intention is everything. So whatever race or background you have, we all need to be willing to upgrade our vocabulary. There was a time when perhaps calling someone like me a half caste was not seen as offensive. It was just seen as accurate, in the UK at a certain time. And then it became offensive, and not everyone was educated as to why it was offensive, or how that language had entered how that word had entered our language, and what the history of it was, and why that was not okay. So, but I think we need to be more interested in respecting each other than defending our right to use words that we felt attached to growing up. I had, if I think about, and I say this with love because I have so much love for my grandmother. I remember she was a white woman, and I remember her, and I hope I don't offend anyone by saying this. She would say, she would describe a certain shade of brown as nigger brown. And she would tell me why this wasn't offensive. It wasn't about comparing it to a person. It was about a certain shade of brown. And for her, of her generation, she was convinced that this wasn't offensive. And yet, we kind of think everyone on this call probably knows what that is. And so I think we just need to be prepared that even if we're not bad people, words that we might have in our vocabulary from a certain time or context might no longer be what we want to be better. I want to be able to use all the advantages I have that my grandmother didn't have, or the more resources I have that my grandmother's generation didn't. I want to be able to do better, and we can do better. So I would say, yes, by having words for things, we are labeling things, and labels are themselves problematic. But what are we trying to label? If we're trying to describe differences, or we're trying to describe actual phenomena, sometimes the labels are necessary. Maybe we'll evolve to a place where the labels aren't necessary, but right now sometimes labels are necessary, and they are imperfect. And from the time I spend in Germany, where Germany has its own history with racism, they're quite keen not to use the word race, because they're like, race doesn't exist, can't use the word race. They get very upset about using the word race. And again, I'm generalizing here, I'm sure that isn't the case for all Germans. But then I'm like, how do you describe racism then? What are racists are discriminating on the basis of? Sometimes trying to repress the words is also unhelpful. So I'd say use words loosely, and be very available to upgrade your vocabulary when you're educated to do better.
Thank you. And I think that leads very nicely into the next part of this conversation, which is really starting to bring in the idea of she says and people and women in the room. The idea of feminism. Where does that come from, and how does what we're talking about really start to tie into that? So the image that was used, that Allyship and the team used as part of the advertising for this on the Eventbrite page, Gloria Steinem and Dorothy Pitman Hughes. And I just wanted to do a little bit of research. So that photo was taken in 1972, I believe. And I found this beautiful quote that I think will actually lead into this next part of the conversation about the impact on feminism, or what is feminism, and intersectionality, intersectional feminism. And what I recently learned as well is around the idea of decolonial feminism. And how does that all start to change? And as women, what can we do? So the quote by Gloria Steinem: "I thought that Black women invented the feminist movement. I learned feminism disproportionately from Black women." And what she's talking about there is the fact that, as Black women, as women of colour, we always had a voice. We had to fight. We were talking. We were up. We were doing these things. And that's where she started to learn. And one of her ways of being what we would now probably call an ally is that whenever she had a stage, she would always also bring other people. And she said that she, in the interview, which I think was 2015, she wanted to bring other voices, those voices that had been othered, up onto the stage to have those conversations, to share their thoughts. And so I'm going to go to Kai first to ask you, what do you think what is the impact on all of this on feminism, or the understanding of what feminism is?
Yeah. What is the impact of, I'm assuming you mean current culture, the conversation of blackness versus whatever on feminism. Well, I'm not sure what the impact is yet, but what I'm hoping that the impact becomes is, again, it goes back to what I was saying before, is that intentional understanding, grounding yourselves in history. I think when you think about feminism, it's always been funny to me that Gloria Steinem says, well, I thought feminism came from Black women, because when you think about the ideal feminism, you think of white feminism. You think of women in the 1970s looking to establish or become empowered outside of the home. And at the time, my understanding of feminism, and if anyone wants to read further, is more of a womanist perspective, where there were women who are already outside of the home having to do the same work as men, and still, similarly to their white counterparts, not receiving the same benefits or respect. I think for myself as a Black woman, feminism has always been about respect and demanding respect, because back to where we started our conversation, my first memory in my entire life is being disrespected, and being respected, because I look different because of my skin tone, and then growing up becoming overly sexualized in the media, in the books I read, in the music I listened to, everywhere. And even now, I'm shaking as I'm thinking about it. I think, Nicole, you may have said it. It's earlier. It's about when you went to London, when you went to the UK, you felt safe. And I wrote a piece back in 2018 about how I felt from my experience that there is no country for Black women, because I've never felt safe. I've always had to fight and demand and argue for what I felt was mine. And so what I hope the impact becomes is that people on this call, and people who are doing their due diligence and educating themselves on social constructs around the world, start to understand what this looks like outside of your own experience, because it is hard. I know we fight. I can say in the States, where everyone's like, I'm not trying to be the angry Black woman. And a couple years ago, I just got over it, and I was like, F it, I am angry. I am so tired of fighting every day. Celie was right in The Color Purple. All her life she had to fight. And as much as we joke about that, I think that is the proper sentiment to describe how I feel about feminism, is that every day I have to fight.
Yeah. I mean, when, this latest wave of Black Lives Matter started, I just went, I just need to take a step back. I am tired. I
couldn't dive in. I needed a minute.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't, and I said it with love, but I said that I can't hold space for white people's discovery now, because I was born in 1971, and I have known that I am Black from the day, from before I knew myself. And so for all of that time, I've been trying to hold this and do this and move through and fighting every day. And now that other people are starting to discover and recognize for themselves, I don't have the energy or the capacity to hold space for you. Whilst I'm pleased for your journey, I don't have the capacity to do that. And I think that that's why conversations like this are so important, because people are getting to see and understand the other side of that, what's really going on for all of us. So I'm going to go to Nicole.
Yes, so I think you said that really well, Kai. So I'm trying to add something different. But I think for me, I was really active in the Me Too movement here in Sweden. And like we talked about last week, is that I've always been accepted and welcomed into white rooms, especially in spaces with white women. So for me, I didn't really, taking the Me Too movement as an example, I didn't realize that fully until two of my friends, who are people of color, told me that, that you're the only person of color in a group of 60 women, right, that are active in the Me Too Sweden movement. And I was like, no, that can't be. And I looked at a photo of us and I was like, yep, yes, that is true. And it was, I think obviously we identify into white women's experiences as well. But I think when I started really thinking about, especially the being exotified and sexualized in a different way, and how that has, led me on the path that I am, how that's opened doors for me because I am considered a beautiful Black woman. That's given me advantages in life. So to me, it's hard because I'm sort of like, obviously I'm still treated as a woman, but I don't have issues with my name. I'm not discriminated in that aspect. So it was more of the fact that I completely agree, the fact that I feel like when you are any person being discriminated on one, account, once that's sorted, your fight is done. It's like, okay, so my leg's broken, it's fixed, great. Whereas if you look at intersectionality, it's like, no, my arms and legs are broken, so there's more than one thing to fix. And I feel like the conversations are always about just the leg. Let's just, we need to fix this because, we're a bigger group. And also because people don't, we're human. We don't always have the capacity to understand what other people are going through. If you've never, ever experienced it, how will you know? How will you be able to understand? So I tend to, when I try to explain what racism is for us or how it feels, I use those examples of, being discriminated against as a woman. Those are my reflections.
Thank you. Ciara?
So from a kind of principle point of view, there should be no conflict. They should not be at odds with each other in terms of feminism, which is, for me, is all about equality of respect, and resources and opportunities. There should be no conflict between that and being actively anti-racist, because we're all about equality, right? I would say where sometimes things can go amiss is, I think, and we all have to look at this within ourselves, but my question to white people in general, and actually not just white people, but is, what do you think the differences are between you and a Black woman? Do you think they're as beautiful? Do you think they're as smart? Do you think they're different in bed? Do you think they're all naturally good dancers? Do you think they can all sing? Do you feel like they can fend for themselves when they're walking home late at night because they know the area and they know how to take care of themselves? Do you think that they speak a bit different? Do you think that they snap their fingers a lot? What are the differences that you perceive between you and any Black woman? We look at Meghan Markle, for example. It's so funny when you see the social media criticisms of her. There's a lot of, I just don't trust her. I just don't trust her. And I remember sometimes women's reaction to me when I worked in larger organizations. They wouldn't be able to put their finger on it. They just didn't trust me. And even though I had a lot of the kind of credentials which fit in with the kind of the white ideal or the British ideal of what someone should be to have the career that I had at that time. So this isn't to place the blame or find deficit with feminism, but women as activists for feminism, carrying the feminist torch, we all have our own lens, we all have our own ship. God knows I have mine. And one of the problems with racism, and the problems also with sexism, is it makes us see that other people are a little bit less human than we are. Maybe men see women as a little bit less human than they are. They don't take the cries or the complaints quite as seriously. They think we're a bit dramatic or, overly emotional. So when you see a Black woman, what do you really think? And I'm not asking you I'm not saying that this makes you a racist or a bad person, but we all have our programming. We've all grown up in the soup of racist messaging. And it would be very surprising if you didn't, in some way, see Black women as different. And that is the problem. That little black box inside your mind, subtle and unarticulated as it is, means you will inevitably be subtly treating or speaking to Black women differently.
Yeah, definitely. there's a deeper sense of othering and dehumanizing that comes with that. And that's the point. I ran a session, an anti-racism session last week, and I showed the video of Amy Cooper and Christian Cooper in the park. For those who don't know, the Central Park video. And I got people to watch it, and I asked them, how did they feel? And everyone said, oh, really uncomfortable, really uncomfortable. And I said, if you're thinking about the dog, of what she's doing to the dog, then you've dehumanized him. You don't see him as a human. If you think of the dog first, or, oh, poor dog, you do not get it. And that's the point. That is the point, that, you know, that a lot of these words, these ideologies have come in from other thinking already, and then they help to change the way that we interact with each other, and we have our own backgrounds. And I'm very aware of the time, and I want to leave some more time for a few questions, but the last point, I'm going to go back to you, Ciara, is really, if we started to talk about feminism and women and what we can do, the whole theme of this thing was really about allyship. And we've gone, you know, underneath to get to the point of what are all the things that are happening behind that? What is actually helping to build that? What is your view of allyship? What does it look like? Given we've talked about feminism, what does that look? Actually, and more importantly, what does it feel like?
So I think it can look a million different ways. So I'm not about prescribing a particular action.
Yeah.
I would ask people that the healing occurs when you are able to love a Black person, love a Black man, love a Black woman. And so if you haven't yet made or had the opportunity to do that in your friendship group, in your romantic life, in your family, then I promise you, you will not fully get it until you do. So please find some Black people to love on. That's my first tip. But secondly, even if you feel like, oh, I don't have a big enough platform, everyone has a platform. Everyone has friends. Everyone has a racist gran. Everyone has colleagues. Everyone goes to events. Everyone has a team in their work. Everyone has some sphere of influence. So what would, if you don't yet sort of feel that you know all the answers or even fully understand the problem, that's okay. But what would you do if your best friend was in distress? What would you do if your daughter or your mum was in distress? You would stand up for them, and you would do it like it mattered. And there are lots of ways of standing up for someone. It can be about being confrontational when that's required. Sometimes it's about being there for them and being a shoulder to lean on and support them practically and emotionally in private. So you get to do you. If you don't feel that you have the confidence or the vocabulary yet to kind of take to the streets with a megaphone, that's okay. But I promise you, there'll be something in your environment that you can do. And if I think about it, I used to do a lot of dance when I was a kid, and I promise this story will become relevant. I did ballet, which is a very problematic world when it comes to misogyny, racism, sizeism, colorism, all the isms. Ballet has it, and I love ballet. And if I think about my ballet teacher when I was a kid, I'm not sure that she had any particular feminist or anti-racist agenda, but she recognized talent in Black girls and all the girls of all the shapes and sizes, and she made sure that people got roles on merit. And it was only later on I realized that wasn't the case in a lot of ballet schools. So just by doing right by the Black people and all the people in your environment, you are already doing something positive. So there is no one here who can't do something. And be led by your context, be led by your environment. And if you are truly committed to equality, it will become obvious to you what you have to do next.
Thank you. Kai.
Yeah, I think the sentiment, Ciara, that, you know, it's a labor of love, or it's likened to love, I think is so real, because I've always described allyship as it's not about you. I know a lot of people that love to say, oh no, I'm an ally. You can't call yourself an ally. I have to designate you as my ally. And I think people, like, it's a nice word that makes people feel comfortable and happy with themselves, and oh, I did something good today. And it's like, it's not about that. I think about it when you have children, or if you have a family and they're hungry, you feed them because they're hungry, not just because you're hungry too. It's not about what necessarily you understand. It's about giving platform to people that need it, giving resources to people that need it, building bridges for people that need to get to the other side because you believe that even though you don't understand why they can't make it over here, let me give you a hand because you need help. And I think if we did a better job collectively of stepping outside of our own egos and our own selves when it comes to, oh, I feel so good about doing the right thing, and more so, I want to make sure that I'm not contributing to the issues that, you know, keep other people down or oppressed. I think that will give us better examples of allyship.
Thank you. Nicole?
Yes. Wow, you've both said some really great things. I'm going to try to add something, but I think, you know, this isn't just like Kai just said, charity. This isn't personal PR. Like, this is, you don't do this to share a post on Facebook that you donated to Doctors Without Borders. That's not what this work is about. And it really, like a lot of people have said in the comments as well, it starts with self-reflection and reflecting on your own bias, reflecting on things that you've done or thought or not done, and really coming to terms with that, you know, just accepting that what's happened has happened, but what do you want to do going forward? And I also think doing is the key here. You know, you're not, by being silent, you are just as complicit when something happens or doesn't happen. So taking action, I think, is the first step. And it's not, you know, you don't need to go on Bumble and being like, let me swipe friends with all the black girls. That's not the point. But it's either hiring or just reflecting on structures, because all of us have a power somehow. And by giving people space, whether it's hiring them or stepping aside or giving someone a chance to, you know, speak or just raising their voice, then you're doing something. And just as a woman, we can all identify with the male structures that we have. This is the same thing. So it is about changing those structures. And, you know, if we unite, we have to unite to do it together if we do want the future to be female, yay. But, you know, you do have to do something. And part of that is reflecting and changing within yourself, but also speaking up and trying every inch to change the structures that we live in.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to add my two penny worth to that, to say that I believe a lot of it starts with empathy and compassion. And that's why I asked the questions that I did and got the, you know, and our gracious guests agreed to share their very personal stories, because when you have empathy, when you recognize the other human and you have empathy and compassion, then it becomes easier to recognize when something is wrong and to act, because you're seeing them as a human. The amount of times that I've been in situations myself where people haven't said anything, they felt uncomfortable, but they haven't said anything, or they haven't done anything because, for various reasons, including that nobody's around with a camera for them to post it on Facebook. There's not, you know, that idea of performative allyship is not actually helping. It's not allyship. It's somebody doing it. There's still that sense of ego in it. If you can take your own ego out and really recognize us as women who have, you know, under the umbrella of being black or othered, there are so many other nuances and so many other layers that come into that. I'm getting goosebumps. There's so many other nuances and layers that come into that. To bunch us all together is actually wrong as well, because we have very different understandings, different experiences of racism and all these different things. But if you start by recognizing the human in all of us, and through empathy and compassion, and, you know, this is where the word, the phrase silence is violence comes in. Violence doesn't have to be physical. It can be educational, it can be economic, it can be access to opportunities. And this, for me, is how you can be an ally, by recognizing that violence that people talk about is not for someone physically going out and hitting someone over the head. It is access. We talk about the ethnic pay gap, all of these different things. When you start to recognize somebody and you really see them, not just hear them and go, oh, you know, I've got a black friend. When you see somebody then you start to recognize yourself and then your own stories in them. And that's when it becomes really personal. And you have a level of power that we don't have because the system has made it that way. And this is where we talked about the trauma on both sides. But if you take the ego out and recognize that and try and move forward, then I think that's a start for allyship and support. Oh, the one thing I will say, the last bit I will say is that sometimes you just need to listen. When somebody is sharing their experiences, you know, of racism, of bias, of whatever that we have gone through, don't make it about you by saying, oh, but when I went to India. Don't, because that negates the whole thing. It negates everything that we've done. And that is not being an ally. That's not empathy. That's turning it around and being about you. And so, you know, we are at the, hold on, let's say, yes, right on time. I is going to be happy. I just wanted to say thank you to our guests for being so open and so honest and sharing their stories with us. Thank you to all of you. I tried to wheel in some of the questions that were in there into the conversation. The next one, Ale will talk to you about. But I think everybody would be happy if you wanted to get in touch, I'm sure. And I'm going to pass back to Ale. Thank you all so much.
Wow, yeah, thank you, Adah. Thank you, all the speakers. You just kind of said some truths there. And some truths that are hard, but very important that we hear, and me included, right? And also, I just wanted to say, we will keep doing these. If you want to email me, or if you want to mail us, or if you email, I put hello at SheSays, and kind of if this is the thing, like the action against racism, what is the next big thing that we should talk about? Just feel free to email the email that I'm going to put on the chat. I also I just want to we're going to make the recording available as well on the Zoom, SheSays Zoom YouTube channel. And I actually, there are some amazing actually resources and thoughts and ideas on the chat. So if you don't know, I would recommend everybody to save the chat. So if you don't know how to do that, on the chat, there's this ... and you can save chat, and it goes into like somewhere on the Zoom folder in your computer, because there's beautiful resources, beautiful things like beautiful citations, beautiful things that people were talking about that I think we should kind of perhaps go back to and analyze even deeper and really think about it as our homework.
Yeah, so, I think part of that. So thank you for people sharing, but part of that is I did see a few people ask for us to list some resources. That's not part of the work. Part of the work is if you go and do the research yourself. So we can. And between all of us, I'm sure we have thousands of resources and could point you in the right direction. And we can share some, but actually part of the work of being a good ally is to go and do that research yourself and find out yourself, and then come and have the conversation about that. I found this, and because that is also very important, because it means that you've reflected and you've made a choice.
Yes. So I feel this was hard, enlightening, but I just wanted to thank you again, all of you, Adah, Nicole, Ciara, Kai, you were amazing, and and I hope everybody enjoyed this as well. And and just like Adah said, let's go think about some stuff.
Go and do some research. And have some conversations. We will regroup. There will be another one, I'm sure, Ale. So we can regroup and we can have some more conversations and take it from there. But this is the start.
Yes.
It's a start, not the start. It's a start. But hopefully,
yes.
Hopefully we are at a different tipping point now, because racism and all of this is not new. It's not new. So thank you. I'm going to stop talking.
All right.
Guys,
bye, everybody. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.